The Three Seas Summit in Warsaw will take place on Monday. The heads of state of our region, representatives of Japan, the Persian Gulf, and other countries interested in economic cooperation will come to Poland. Donald Trump's close associate, U.S. Secretary of Energy Chris Wright, will also attend the summit. I am glad that the Secretary of Energy will be in our country in the coming days and will also meet Prime Minister Tusk, because these are very important issues for Poland. The summit will be the largest international event of its kind held in Poland during our presidency of the European Union. Despite this, Radosław Sikorski did not even mention the subject during his exposé. What's more, he turned his nose up at the guest list, which was taken care of by President Andrzej Duda. Mr. President, according to the fact noted that I did not mention the Three Seas initiative. That's right, I didn't mention it because it is a presidential initiative. Mr. President issued the invitations without agreeing with the government. These are surprising words because there are plans for meetings between the US Secretary and government officials. President Andrzej Duda hinted that an agreement important for the future of Poland's nuclear power plant could be signed during the summit.
Mam nadzieję, zostaną podjęte decyzje, które spowodują.
I hope the decisions will be made that will make this investment, which is of the construction of a nuclear power plant jointly with the United States using Westinghouse technology together with Bechtel, accelerate and will finally be dynamically implemented according to how it should be implemented in accordance with the original assumptions. The topic of cooperation with the United States and the construction of a nuclear power plant in Poland has been repeatedly discussed by Presidents Andrzej Duda and Donald Trump.
To są kwestie fundamentalne.
These are fundamental issues we have been pushing for this visit of the Secretary of Energy. We have talked about this subject many times in the White House. I am glad that this visit will come to fruition. In the fall of 2023, the Law and Justice government signed a contract with the US Westinghouse Bechtel consortium to design Poland's first nuclear power plant. That one expired at the end of March. Government officials gave assurances that despite this, the investment is not in danger. On April Fool's Day, the Prime Minister said the following. Negotiations on such a bridge agreement with contractors have been completed, and I wanted to thank Ms. Minister Czarnecka and the team that worked on a better form of the agreement. 3 weeks have passed and nothing concrete is known about the contract. If the negotiations have been completed, why hasn't the contract been signed? If it had been so quiet, if it hadn't mattered so much, then probably this agreement would have been signed much earlier and would have simply gone into effect on the tab, that is simply from the 1st of April. We would have had a new contract. That didn't happen, which means there are some deeper problems. There are many indications that the new contract will finally be signed in the coming days. This was reported by the government plenipotentiary for strategic energy infrastructure, Wojciech Wrochna. It seems to me that next week there should be an official signing of the bridge agreement with the Westinghouse Bechtel regarding the construction of a nuclear power plant in Pomerania. However, the delay gives food for thought. If the construction of key infrastructure for Poland's security was a priority for the government, we would not have been in a situation where we are not bound by any agreements with the United States. Every month of delay means delaying the next stages of this project, which consequently translate into problems in the implementation of the entire investment. Because if we look at the other stories of nuclear power plant construction in the world, it is such small problems that often cause problems for the whole investment. And instead of building a nuclear power plant in 7 to 8 years, you build a power plant in 10 to 15 years. Radosław Sikorski's statements indicate that the Polish government was not interested in inviting the US Energy Secretary to Poland. If the agreement is indeed signed next week, it will be another success of President Andrzej Duda in building Poland's energy security in cooperation with the United States.
Downgraded meeting and questions about the future of negotiations. A summit on Ukraine in London, with the participation of the heads of diplomacy of the coalition states supporting Kiev, has been cancelled. Instead, working meetings of delegations are to be held. In the meantime, Washington has issued ultimatums to Russia and Ukraine. While Kiev is ready for concrete talks, the Kremlin still has not officially agreed to the Americans' proposals. According to unofficial information, Ukraine's territorial concessions are at stake, but also its full independence, including military. Odesa, Kharkiv, Marhanets, another massive Russian attack. At least 9 people were killed, more than a dozen were wounded. Kiev wants an immediate ceasefire. This is a basic condition for opening direct talks with Moscow. If the Russians are ready for a complete ceasefire, we are ready for any format of negotiations with them, any format. This is what the Ukrainian delegation is to discuss in London. A summit of countries in the coalition supporting Kiev in its war with Russia was to be held there today, with the U.S. Secretary of State at ministerial level. However, the summit was canceled, officially for logistical reasons.
General Kellogg is there. And so he will be having those conversations. So we look forward to hearing back from him about whether or not we've had some success in London.
That success is supposed to be convincing Kiev of the American peace proposal. According to unofficial information, the problematic issue is that of Crimea, which, according to the proposal, Ukraine would formally relinquish. Ukraine does not legally recognize the occupation of Crimea. There is nothing to talk about. It is beyond our constitution. This is our territory, the territory of the people of Ukraine. We can't just say, why not? It seems to me that we have already stated this with regard to any other occupied territory, and I have stated it as president, and the Constitution of Ukraine declares it by its existence. Russia, on the other hand, has the biggest problem with Ukrainian independence, both the open road to the European Union and the unlimited possibility of expanding the army. On top of that, the Kremlin is also unwilling to agree to the presence of Western stabilization forces in Ukraine.
We've really tried to understand things from the perspective of both the Ukrainians and the Russians. What do Ukrainians care the most about? What do the Russians care the most about? And I think that we've put together a very fair proposal. We're going to see if the Europeans, the Russians, and the Ukrainians are ultimately able to get this thing over the finish line.
The Americans have given a clear ultimatum in the face of Russian lies and attempts to prolong negotiations indefinitely. Washington may pull out of the talks altogether. Hence, it seems that the downgrading of the London summit sends a clear message to all sides. I think America is the real leader. We want them to participate. We want them to put pressure on Russia, but we are ready to answer for our words. If tomorrow the Russians are ready not only for a ceasefire, and if they actually cease fire, we are ready to sit down for talks and move on to other steps to end the war, if at least something is actually done and not just said. The Ukrainians know that without U.S. support, they have no chance of holding the front. Russia, on the other hand, is facing growing economic problems. It seems that for both sides, there will be no better time for a ceasefire, but there will be no winners either.
Thousands of faithful bid farewell to Pope Francis. In the morning, with the ringing of a bell and liturgical chanting, the procession with the body of Pope Francis left St. Martha's house. Then, amid thousands of faithful in St. Peter's Square, the solemn procession entered the Vatican Basilica. In the Basilica, the Litany of the Saints was sung in Latin, and a section of the Gospel was read. The coffin with Francis's body was placed in front of the high altar of St. Peter's. 4 entrances to the Basilica are open for those who wish to pay tribute to the late Pope. All the faithful pass through the Holy Door and then line up in the nave to reach the location of the coffin. St. Peter's Basilica is open to the faithful from today until Friday. Wednesday until midnight, Thursday from 7 a.m. to midnight, Friday from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m.
Piątek wieczorem trumna zostanie uroczyście zamknięta.
On Friday evening, the coffin will be solemnly closed. In accordance with custom, documents attesting to the Pope's death and a bag of coins minted during his pontificate will be deposited there. The faithful have been gathering in St. Peter's Square since the early hours of the morning.
Czuć ogromny spokój.
One feels a great calm, a great peace. A last look at the Pope in the coffin. Respect. You can feel that respect and peace.
Francesco per me rappresenta la Chiesa in cui credo.
Pope Francis to me represents the church I believe in, the new church, the church that is present among people in difficulty, the church of the poor, the church for the least amongst us.
I would say that he was a father of the church, and he was a model of sanctity for me, of holiness.
It's very important to say goodbye to him.
Security measures have been tightened around the Vatican. Metal detectors have been installed at the entrances to St. Peter's Square, and the airspace above Rome has been shut down. The world is in mourning. Masses presided over by a cardinal are being celebrated in the Vatican every day. Liturgies for Pope Francis are being celebrated around the world, such as in Jerusalem. God bless his soul. Pope Francis is an international figure. He used to call for peace, love, respect, dialogue between religions. The Mass is something simple for such a person. A solemn Mass for the Pope began at 7 p.m. today in the Warsaw Archcathedral. On the day of Francis's funeral, in accordance with the decree of the Polish President Andrzej Duda, national mourning will be in force. You can also see a very big stir in the people. There is a book of condolence in the cathedral. People need somehow to express their emotions, grief and gratitude somehow. It's all very beautiful and very deep. On Saturday, we will say goodbye to the Pope for the last time. The funeral will be attended by world leaders, including Polish President Andrzej Duda, Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky, and US President Donald Trump. Several 100,000 people will gather in St. Peter's Square and around the Basilica. The Mass will be presided over by the Camerlengo of the Holy Roman Church, Cardinal Kevin Farrell.
Następnie ciało papieża zostanie
Then the
przewiezione.
Pope's body will be transported. This we know, not carried in a procession, but taken to the Papal Basilica of St. Mary Major. For the first time in 120 years, the Pope will not be laid to rest in the Vatican grottos under St. Peter's Basilica. The Pope, in accordance with his last will be buried in the Basilica of St. Mary Major, where he frequently visited, especially before and after returning from foreign trips.
Moises Schmidt, a cocoa grower and entrepreneur in center-north Brazil who has been investing in cocoa farming technology to expand production, secured backing from some of the world's largest cocoa traders and chocolate companies to develop what would be the world's largest cocoa farm.
Buscando uma alternativa.
We started producing cocoa, looking for an alternative that would add to the fruit's production. Cocoa production needed shade, and we began to understand a little the dynamics and the technical issues of cocoa. We began to identify that cocoa in full sun had a better response, and the tree grew faster. It started producing fruit much earlier, much more. The aspiring Brazilian cocoa king wants to revolutionize the way the chocolate ingredient is produced, said Schmidt Agricola, the family-owned group that cultivates more than 35,000 hectares in Brazil's Bahia state. This group has preliminary agreements with companies in the commodities and chocolate business. The project comes at a time when the chocolate industry faces a global supply crisis, with crops in top growing regions of West Africa facing stagnation, while demand for the beans continues strong. New cocoa production elsewhere is critical to supply growing global production of chocolate. It surprised us. We didn't expect this drop in global cocoa production, but it is worth highlighting an unmet demand that we had not seen in the world. If you look at the Americas today, there is a pent-up demand for this product. Moises Schmidt, who oversees fruit operations for his family business, started with cocoa in 2019 when his company finished an assessment on the cocoa market, concluding, in hindsight correctly, that there would be a supply shortfall in some years' time. Most cocoa farms in the world, particularly in Africa, are small, only a few dozen hectares. The average cocoa yield in the Ivory Coast, the world's largest cocoa producer, is 500 kilograms per hectare. By contrast, according to Schmidt, trees already planted across 400 hectares of his cultivated land are producing around 3,000 kilos per hectare, or 10 times the average yield of the traditional cocoa areas in Brazil. The target is to get past 4,000 kilograms per hectare. The concept behind this cocoa plantation is to apply large-scale agriculture techniques to the new area, as if it were a soybean or cornfield. In recently planted land in Riachão das Neves, the rows of cocoa trees are more concentrated, with only the space for mechanization. Perhaps this mass production of cocoa could be the solution to the problem of slave labor in the chocolate supply chain. Professional, mechanized agriculture is much more efficient than the lower-tech model of using slaves. Perhaps Schmidt's initiative could accomplish what many NGOs, funded by untold sums of worldwide taxpayer dollars, failed to.